The History Channel Jonestown Paradise Lost is available on Hulu through their instantly streamed plan. Made in 2007, it contains fascinating material about the People's Temple with the focus of what happened on November 18, 1978 in Jonestown. The documentary is an hour and 40 minutes long and contains a mixture of recreations, real footage, old pictures, and original voice recordings. There are interviews with ex-members and Jonestown survivors who give first-count testimony to the events of the Jonestown Massacre. In 1955, in the infancy of civil rights, 24-year-old Reverend Jim Jones was ahead of the times in regard to racial and social issues. In Indianapolis, Jones left the church in which he preached in order to found the People's Temple. Jones's radical vision was that of desegregation of the church, and his initial mission was to end the separations of race and class, lifting the downtrodden and supplying for the needs of his community. Congregants of the temple who questioned the lack of segregation were asked to leave the People's Temple Church. His small congregation opened many avenues of outreach, including soup kitchens, provisions of clothing to the needy, and other noble causes. This altruism extended to his private life when he and his wife became the first white family in Indianapolis to adopt a black child. Added to what was referred to as his rainbow family were 2 Asian children and 1 Caucasian biological son. In the dawn of the fight for racial equality and prefacing the assassinations of several social heroes, Jones's roots had the potential to be something incredibly noble. Deborah Layton, former member of People's Temple, says, "Nobody joins a cult. Nobody joins something they think is going to hurt them. You join a religious organization, you join a political movement, and you join with people that you really like." Dr. Alexandra Stein, teacher and expert on cults, explains an individual's joining into a cult in much the same way. In a YouTube interview with Talk Beliefs, Stein shares her own experience in becoming a member of a cult through political activism. Wanting to make a difference in social injustice, Stein became involved with an organization that seemed like an attractive step in the right direction long before realizing that it was a cult. Like Stein's political group, the People's Temple to many initial participants felt like a solution to society's problems that one could actually plug into to become involved. Former Temple member Brian Kravitz recalls being at a crossroads in life when he joined the People's Temple. Having chosen not to go to Vietnam, Kravitz found a desire instead to do something for the betterment of society. He found himself at a turning point and wondering what to do with the rest of his life when he discovered Jones's organization. The humanitarianism and activism of the temple seemed to be exactly what Kravitz needed to provide meaning to his directionless life. Layton says every single person felt that they had a purpose there and that they were exceptionally special. And that is how he brought so many young college kids in, so many older black women, and so many people from diverse backgrounds who realized that there was something bigger than themselves that they needed to be involved in. And Jim Jones offered that. Stein also expresses a time of change in her life when the prospects for the future had altered, and how this situation of vulnerability combined with a quest for meaning and purpose can play a role in an individual's decision to join a new religious movement such as a cult. Stark and Bainbridge also adhere to the same kind of approach when looking at cult recruitment by looking at deprivation ideological approach. This viewpoint takes on the idea that joiners of cults have some sort of deprivation in their lives which the cult can fill with some aspect of their ideology. Having begun in Indianapolis with a tiny congregation of only 20 participants, the People's Temple came from humble beginnings. Jones had bigger plans for his church, and in order to accomplish his vision, it had to be spectacular. The fact that Jones advocated for the rights of the downtrodden gave him huge strides in gathering followers. In a time when racial issues were coming to the forefront of social awareness, Jones was there to meet the gathering demands for material requirements of the poor and the spiritual guidance of the less privileged. In addition to activism, Jones began basing his sermons on supernatural healings, which were most often staged by followers who were willing to perpetuate Jones's vision. People's Temple practiced rigorous recruitment techniques to grow the fold, which included door-to-door invitations to church and cross-country bus caravans for the purpose of gathering new members. In this way, the People's Temple grew to thousands by the late 1970s. Jones was also responsible for recruitment and his extraordinary charisma. He knew how to appeal to the audience he desired by creating a church reminiscent of black spiritualism. With vibrant music and displays of worship, Jones drew in crowds of blacks who were familiar with this kind of sermon. His promises of utopian cooperation among members and his provisions of clothing, food, and even homes to his poor congregants made it easy for members to pledge all of their loyalty, possessions, and paychecks. Another appeal to the People's Temple movement was its roots in Christianity. Jones began his ministry as a Christian reverend preaching from the pages of the Bible, albeit in a somewhat distorted fashion. According to J. Gordon Melton, new religions are primarily defined not by any characteristics they share, but by their relationship to the other forms of religious life represented by the dominant churches. Most often, cults are offshoots of more established religions, which makes recruitment into cult-like commitment much easier than for someone who has no previous exposure to religion of any kind. This is why the familiarity of black spiritualism and the styles of worship and sermons was a major draw for Jones's target audience. Despite the promising beginnings of People's Temple, the religious movement did not continue on its potential benevolent path. There is no universal definition of a cult, but many have tried to create one. On a truth loader debate via YouTube, Alexandra Stein defines cults as organizations controlled by one charismatic leader in an order of hierarchy. They're psychologically controlling, perpetuators of a trauma bond in which an individual's tormentor is also their only source of comfort, and isolation of members. In another interview, Stein describes a cult's desire to control its members' sexual and reproductive rights. Steve Hassan defines cults as sustainers of mind control over members which strive to govern followers' behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. He asserts that signs of malevolent cults include sleep deprivation, installation of phobias, and dietary manipulation. In looking solely at these two models for cult definition, the People's Temple meets all criteria to an extreme. Jones's power over the People's Temple was absolute and unquestionable. Former member Stanley Clayton says, being in an environment where you're constantly up, constantly busy, being made to feel guilty if you take too many luxuries like sleeping, you tend to not really think for yourself. And I did allow Jones to think for me because I figured he had the better plan. I gave my rights up to him as many others did. Jones also fostered a trauma bond with members in which he was both the abuser and the only source of comfort. During one particular sermon, Jones ordered an entire congregation to drink cups of Kool-Aid and to give some to their children as well. After every member had finished their glass, Jones informed them that they and their children were about to die because the drink was laced with poison. After long moments of mourning, terror, and trauma, Jones admitted his lie and used the tactic as a loving lesson in obedience and faithfulness to the organization and himself. Jones ensured isolation of members from the world outside by ultimately relocating hundreds of followers to a remote location in South America in the region of Guyana, naming his city Jonestown. In the middle of the jungle, there was no contact with anyone outside the cult, and even the relationships between the members was closely monitored and censored. Jones also spoke out against sexual relationships, insisting that sex distracted members from their true purpose and the attention that would better be spent working for the betterment of Jonestown and the People's Temple. He also asserted that all individuals are homosexuals and that any urge to sleep with a member of the opposite sex was merely a compensation for their perversion and sin. Jones himself was not celibate, though he presented himself as such. Jones used mind control to govern members' behavior by demanding specific behavior that, if not followed, would result in public beatings and humiliation devices. He fed members false information about nuclear war in the United States and allowed them no other source of information. He used brainwashing manipulations to control individuals' thoughts and torture tactics to regulate people's emotions. He also established control through sleep deprivation, forcing members to work almost endlessly, seeing sleep as a guilty, undeserved luxury as they worked up to 20 hours a day. Random white nights were also instated, where members were called to the public pavilion in the middle of the night to stand and listen to long, rambling sermons about the impending persecution and nuclear warfare. Dietary manipulation was a major factor of Jones's control tactics, as members ate insufficient portions of rice 3 times a day. Former member and Jonestown massacre survivor Vernon Goffney says, I think it's difficult to express to people who don't have this kind of experience that, oh, well, why didn't you just leave? It's so horrible, it's so terrible, how could you put yourself in that position? When actually we were working for a cause that we believed in. It's like taking people to the limit, and then moving that line, and then moving that line, and then moving that line. The People's Temple began to make its move to South America in 1977, gradually bringing hundreds of men, women, and children into their self-sustaining compound in the middle of the remote jungle. The escape to Guyana was largely in part due to the negative publicity that Jones had been receiving in the States. The media was beginning to investigate and print stories told by former members regarding abuse and psychological torture perpetuated by Jones while members of his flock. Members of the People's Temple denied all allegations as their undying loyalty to Jones was brought under the microscope. Jones used the negative publicity as a warning to his people of persecutions yet to come. Threatening an end to the utopian dream under the hands of the evil government, Jones terrified his people into fleeing with him out of the grasp of the United States' schemes. However, escape was not entirely possible for the People's Temple members, as long as concerned family members remained behind, worried for the safety of their loved ones in isolation in South America. On November 14, 1977, a handful of these concerned family members joined U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan and several members of the media on an expedition to check on members of Jonestown. After several near cancellations on Jones's part, Ryan, 2 reporters, and a camera crew were allowed into the Jonestown compound. A party was underway, and members of the People's Temple, having rehearsed vigorously for days, shared stories of paradise and heaven on earth under the regime of Jim Jones. Under the thin guise of celebration, discontent was brewing. Several members began secretly slipping notes to Ryan's entourage, requesting an escape from Jonestown when Ryan left. Ryan assured each member that if they wished to leave, he would somehow get them out. The next day, dissenters were loaded into trucks and driven from the jungle to a runway where Ryan's planes were waiting to carry the group back to the States. Jones allowed these members to leave, but fluctuated between expressing feelings of betrayal and urging them to come and visit any time. While boarding the planes that would take them out of Guyana, the escapees, the congressman, and a camera crew were ambushed by armed guards under the order of Jones. Congressman Ryan, a fleeing member of the People's Temple, and 3 members of the media crews were shot and killed on the airstrip before they could get safely away. For Jim Jones, the death of protected government official Leo Ryan was exactly the blessing he needed to bring to fruition the plan he had been practicing for since almost the beginning of People's Temple. Telling his members in Jonestown of the death of Congressman Ryan, Jones insisted that because of his murder, the People's Temple would never be safe. On November 18, 1978, 909 men, women, and children drank a mixture of juice and cyanide and died in the jungles of Guyana. Over 300 of those dead were children.